For nearly a century, pilots were defined by the chart they could fold in a storm. That paper never ran out of batteries, and it could save your life over empty fields. But what killed this ritual was not technology. It was a relentless expiration clock set to 56 days. A schedule that forced a nationwide scramble to replace every single chart again and again until the economics finally collapsed. If you think paper vanished because pilots just wanted iPads, you do not know the real reason. So how did the cockpit's most iconic tool become unsustainable overnight? Long before a chart ever touched a cockpit, pilots crossed the continent by following the land itself. Early airmail flights stitched together a route from rivers, railroads, and roads, called the Iron Compass. But on cloudy days, even the best pilot could lose all sense of direction. The solution, as simple as it was monumental, arrived in the form of giant concrete arrows, each one stretching up to 20 feet across and painted a blinding yellow. From Pennsylvania to San Francisco, more than 1,500 of these arrows pointed the way, each paired with a 50-foot beacon tower whose rotating light could be seen for miles at night. For the first time, the ground itself gave pilots a lifeline through fog and darkness. Even this network had limits. Landmarks changed, new obstacles appeared, and the routes themselves kept shifting as aviation grew. In 1927, recognizing that arrows and beacons could not keep pace with the expanding sky, the government began printing the first official strip maps. These early charts, like the Moline to Kansas City route, were more than lines on a page. They captured every water tower, smokestack, and bend in the river, a visual diary of the American landscape as seen from above. Each map included not just terrain, but handwritten route descriptions, warnings about unlit towers, and notes from pilots who had flown the route before. By the 1930s, aviators like L. Ray Jepperson were sketching their own editions in battered notebooks, building a private archive that soon became an entire company dedicated to pilot-made charts. The sectional chart emerged from this era as both a work of art and a tool for survival. Every symbol, every color, was chosen to flatten a three-dimensional world onto something a pilot could fold and mark up with a pencil. These charts transformed the cockpit into a place where navigation became a kind of ritual. The map, not just a reference, but a companion. The concrete arrows faded into history. The sectional chart took their place, becoming the backbone of how pilots understood the world beneath their wings. A paper sectional chart, fresh from the shelf, feels almost ceremonial in a pilot's hands. Before the engine ever turns over, there is the quiet ritual of laying it out across a kitchen table or the wing of a waiting Cessna 152. A sharp pencil draws a line from departure to destination, ruler and protractor set the heading, and notes fill the margins. Fuel stops, radio frequencies, reminders about towers that rise out of nowhere. The chart itself is massive, nearly 3 feet wide when unfolded, and pilots have long mastered the art of the origami fold. The goal is simple: reveal only the section you need and nothing more. Creases are pressed sharp so the paper fits perfectly onto a kneeboard, a clipboard barely wider than a paperback novel, strapped tight over a pilot's thigh. Every fold is deliberate, every smudge of graphite a silent record of a journey yet to unfold. In the cockpit, the map transforms into a living tool. Turbulence rattles the cabin, but the chart must stay put. One hand on the yoke, the other flipping, folding, sometimes tearing as the wind sneaks in from an open vent. The kneeboard becomes command central, compass rose, course lines, and altitude notes all visible at a glance. Veteran pilots recall spending hours perfecting their VFR fold, a technique passed down like folklore. The right crease could mean the difference between fumbling for a waypoint and spotting it instantly. Even the sound of the paper, crinkling as it is refolded mid-flight, becomes part of the experience. Plotting a course this way is not just about moving from point A to point B. It is an act of translation, turning the chaos of the landscape below into something readable, manageable, safe. Retired pilots describe the satisfaction of tracing a river on the chart, then watching it snake past the window. Every mark on the map is a promise. If all else fails, this paper will get you home. The tactile memory of ink, paper, and pencil lingers long after the flight is over, a reminder that navigation was once as much about touch as it was about sight. Every chart in a pilot's bag bore a silent threat, the effective date printed in bold, small type. This was not just a suggestion. The Federal Aviation Administration required that every sectional chart expire exactly 56 days after it became valid. On the 57th day, the same map that had guided a pilot safely home was no longer legal for flight. The rule was absolute. If an airspace boundary changed, a new tower appeared, or a radio frequency shifted, the old chart could become dangerously and legally obsolete overnight. The origin of this ticking clock stretches back to the post-war boom, when the skies filled with new airports, expanded airways, and a tangle of evolving regulations. To keep pace, the Federal Aviation Administration's Aeronautical Charting Office set the 56-day cycle in motion. Every revision, no matter how minor, triggered a national reset. Charts were stamped with their own expiration date, and pilots were expected to carry only current editions. For instrument flight, using an outdated chart was not just frowned upon, it could be cited as a regulatory violation. Even for visual flight, insurance companies and investigators scrutinized the date after any incident. Inside the Federal Aviation Administration, officials like the Chief of Charting carried the burden of this relentless schedule. Their calendars revolved around the cycle, weeks spent gathering updates from air traffic controllers, airport managers, and surveyors, followed by a frantic rush to finalize revisions before the presses rolled. Every chart had to be accurate, every symbol precise, because a single missed change could cost lives. The process was rigid, bureaucratic, and unforgiving. No exceptions, no delays. The moment the clock struck midnight on the 56th day, the new charts took legal effect, and the old ones were destined for the shredder. This was the machinery that kept American aviation safe, but it ran on anxiety. Pilots checked expiration dates with the same urgency as fuel gauges. Airport shops scrambled to stock the latest editions, while the Federal Aviation Administration's own staff lived by the unyielding tempo of the update cycle. The system guaranteed that every flight would be planned with the most current information possible, but at the cost of a logistical storm about to break. In the shadow of the 56-day cycle, the cost of keeping American skies current became impossible to ignore. Every 8 weeks, printers fired up across the country, churning out millions of fresh sectional charts. Pallets stacked in warehouse aisles rolled out to airport shops, flight schools, and dusty backrooms at fixed-base operators. For every new chart that arrived, an equal number, sometimes more, were stripped from the shelves and tossed, their expiration dates now a liability. Dumpsters behind small-town airports filled with paper maps still crisp from the press. Their only crime, an outdated frequency or a new cell tower. Some pilots hoarded old editions, stuffing them into hangar cabinets or car trunks, but the vast majority were simply discarded, a silent flood of wasted ink and effort. Inside the print shops, foremen watched the cycle with a mixture of pride and frustration. The presses ran hot for weeks, only to see their work become trash in less than 2 months. One longtime supervisor recalled the sight of entire skids of unsold charts wheeled straight to recycling, the weight of the paper matched only by the sense of futility. By 2019, the economics had reached a breaking point. The Federal Aviation Administration could no longer justify the expense, and it ended free distribution of paper charts. Pilots then paid full price for each new edition, and many simply stopped buying them altogether. Print runs shrank from hundreds of thousands to just a few thousand copies, and the era of government-subsidized navigation faded almost overnight. Chart cabinets once overflowing with new stock now sat half empty, and the ritual of swapping out old maps became a rare event. The waste, both financial and physical, had finally forced the system to retreat. What remained was a shell of the old infrastructure. A few presses still ran. A handful of shops sold paper to the diehards, but the tide had turned. The logistical nightmare that once defined aviation navigation had reached its end, not with a technological leap, but with the quiet admission that the old way could no longer carry its own weight. When the iPad landed in the hands of pilots, it did not just offer a new screen. It erased the entire burden of chart distribution overnight. A single device, no thicker than a notepad, could now hold every sectional, every approach plate, every update, all ready to download in minutes. Gone were the days of checking expiration dates, rushing to airport shops, or waiting for a new shipment to arrive by truck. Now, a pilot could sit at home, tap update, and watch as a full set of charts refreshed before the coffee finished brewing. The logistics that once required warehouses, printing presses, and a fleet of delivery trucks vanished with a Wi-Fi connection. 4Flight, the app that quickly became the cockpit standard, made the process almost effortless. Pilots recall the first time they opened their iPad to find every chart they needed just a swipe away. No folding, no creased edges, no risk of grabbing an outdated map. The cost of shipping, printing, and disposing of millions of sheets of paper simply disappeared. For the price of a single annual subscription, a pilot could access the entire national airspace, updated instantly with zero physical waste. One early adopter, a flight instructor in Texas, remembers updating his entire chart library in less than 5 minutes while waiting for students to arrive. What once took weeks and an army of workers now happened in the background, quietly and reliably. The paper chase was over. The cockpit became lighter, cleaner, and infinitely more connected, as the problem of keeping up with the changing sky seemed, for a moment, completely solved. A single feature transformed the iPad from a digital filing cabinet into something more like a co-pilot. Georeferencing, overlaying the aircraft's real-time GPS position as a moving blue dot on the chart, replaced an entire mental process. Before this, pilots spent years learning how to match the symbols on a map to the world outside, tracing rivers, counting roads, scanning for towers, and constantly cross-checking their position with clock and compass. The ritual was demanding, sometimes exhausting, but it was also a point of pride. With 4Flight's moving map, first released for the iPad in February 2011, that work vanished. Now the airplane itself appeared on the sectional, gliding smoothly across terrain, updating its location every second. The pilot's job shifted from interpreting the landscape to simply monitoring the screen. No more folding and refolding, no more second-guessing which bend in the river lay below. The map always knew where you were. The FAA issued a 2014 advisory circular that gave this new workflow its official blessing, approving portable electronic flight bags with geo-reference charts as a legal replacement for paper in VFR cockpits. For the first time, the blue dot became the pilot's primary reality. Veteran instructors recall the moment students stopped asking where we were because the answer was always right there, glowing on the glass. The cockpit's quiet tension, once filled with the sound of paper and the murmur of calculations, was replaced by a gentle confidence. But with that ease came a new question. What happens when the blue dot disappears? Aviation safety experts warn that the digital revolution in the cockpit has quietly introduced new vulnerabilities, ones that a software update alone cannot fix. Dr. Megan Rios, a human factors analyst who studies pilot performance, describes a pattern in recent incident reports. Pilots, especially younger pilots, struggle to recover when their screens go dark. The phrase, "children of the magenta line," has become shorthand in the industry for a generation of aviators who follow the GPS path across the glass, rarely looking outside or cross-checking with paper. Submissions to the Airline Safety Reporting System, ASRS, now recount pilots losing situational awareness after a dead battery or an app crash, sometimes resulting in airspace violations or near misses. In one widely cited case, a flight instructor and a student became disoriented above rural Texas after their iPad overheated and shut down mid-flight. Neither had a current paper chart on board. Air traffic control eventually guided them back, but the official report noted a critical lapse in basic navigation skills that were once drilled into every pilot through hours of chart work and land reading. Training programs have shifted quietly. Instructors report that dead reckoning and pilotage exercises, once a staple of the syllabus, are now abbreviated or skipped. The FAA Airman Certification Standards still list these skills, but practical emphasis has faded as electronic flight bags, often called EFBS, dominate. Dr. Rios cautions that while digital tools have made flying safer in many ways, they have also eroded the muscle memory that once saved pilots when everything else failed. The cockpit has never been more efficient, but the cost is a slow, invisible decay of the very skills that defined airmanship for generations. The disappearance of paper in the cockpit is not just an aviation story. It echoes across the map of modern navigation. On the water, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, known as NOAA, remembers a similar reckoning. For centuries, mariners plotted courses with dividers and grease pencils, tracing lines across sprawling nautical charts. But by 2019, the agency announced a full phase out of paper, shifting to electronic navigational charts called ENCs, updated in real time and displayed on glowing screens. A NOAA representative described the relief. No more waiting weeks for a new edition, no more stacks of obsolete charts crowding the bridge. Yet harbor pilots quietly admit that something essential faded. The old ritual of plotting a position by hand, of reading the sea as much as the map, has given way to watching a digital ship icon glide across a grid. On the highway, the story repeats. Once a Rand McNally Atlas sat open on the dashboard, its creases and coffee stains a record of family road trips. Now the blue dot on a phone screen tells drivers exactly where to turn, but the art of reading the land, of matching a line on paper to a bend in the road, has all but vanished. Cartography historians warn that as GPS has replaced the folded map, our sense of place has grown abstract, untethered from the world outside the windshield. A contemporary pilot holding a weathered sectional for a final check reflects on these changes. The last act before every flight used to be the careful fold and stow of the chart, a small private ritual. Today, that gesture lingers mostly as memory, a quiet echo of a world where navigation meant touching the map, not just following a screen. Today, a pilot's position appears on glass, not paper. As over 90% of US aviators now fly with digital charts, navigation relies on servers, signals, and screens. The map's tactile certainty is gone, replaced by trust in code. In an era of automation, knowing what is lost may matter as much as what is gained. What's your backup when the blue dot disappears? Share your thoughts below.